Hi guys. Tonight we slip into a lamplit room that smells like clay, oil smoke, and the faint sour sweetness of spilled beer, because even the most ancient mysteries come with a snack budget. You're standing barefoot on cool stone, listening to reeds rattle outside a temple wall while a scribe clears his throat, like he's about to read your fate out loud. The shelves around you are not books, not scrolls, but stacked tablets that look like dried mud pressed into rectangles, each one stamped with tiny wedges that still feel sharp enough to cut a careless thumb. And you can almost hear it, that soft sandpaper sound of stylus on clay, the whisper that says somebody wrote this down on purpose. You probably won't survive this, not in the heroic sword-swinging way, but in the far more humiliating way where your brain tries to keep up with gods, kings, omens, and accounting. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop your location and local time in the comments, because it is weirdly soothing to imagine you listening from a sleepy corner of the world while we wander through ancient night. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. A priest leads you deeper into the archive, and it is not dramatic the way movies do it. No sudden thunder, no glowing artifacts. Just a narrow hallway, a door that sticks, and the patient, practical sense that this place exists to store records. That is the first reality check. Ancient religion is also paperwork. You want a cosmic revelation, and you get inventory management. Honestly, relatable. The room opens into a space where clay tablets sit in baskets, on ledges, in neat piles that make your shoulders tense. One bump, and you will be the villain who destroyed someone's entire dissertation. A senior scribe gestures for silence, not because the tablets are sacred in the way you expect, but because noise is disrespectful to the work. You watch him wet his fingertips and lift a tablet that looks ordinary, then turn it to catch the lamplight so the wedges throw tiny shadows. The writing is cuneiform, and even if you cannot read it, you can tell when a line is crowded, when the stylus pressed hard, when the hand got impatient. Here is the mainstream fact that anchors you. The Sumerians, in southern Mesopotamia, are among the earliest known people to use writing, and cuneiform begins as a way to track goods and obligations, grain, sheep, jars of oil, payments, deliveries. This is not folklore yet, it is administration. That makes what happens next feel even stranger, because the scribe points to a section that is not grain, not sheep, not oil. It is names that do not behave like human names, titles that sound like storms, commands that look like ritual but read like orders. He does not call them gods at first. He calls them the Great Ones, as if even saying the word might invite trouble. Then he slides another tablet beside it, and another, and you notice a pattern. These are not just hymns. These are not just prayers. They sound like someone is reporting events, movements, decisions, consequences. Your skin prickles because you recognize the shape of a story that wants to be more than a story. It is like watching a politician try to pass off a scandal as a weather report. Today, the wind shifted, and also your governor definitely didn't take a bag of silver. The archive feels full of that same careful tone, calm surface, panic underneath. The priest explains the tablets come from different cities, copied by different hands. Some lines are familiar, used in rituals. Others are rare, almost never recited aloud. There is a practical reason for that. In this world, speech is action. Saying something can be a kind of doing. So if a line claims a god was defeated, or forced to negotiate, or pushed out of a holy place, then repeating it is not entertainment. It is risky. You lean closer. The wedge marks are tiny, orderly, and the lamp makes them look like miniature footprints crossing a field of dried earth. A junior scribe sits nearby with a fresh lump of clay, practicing signs. His posture is stiff with concentration. Every so often he glances at the senior scribe like a kid watching an older sibling handle fireworks. You can practically hear his thoughts. Please do not explode. Please do not explode. He seems like he's been warned that some texts are not for casual copying. The archive does not feel like a museum. It feels like a server room. Everything is humming with stored information. But instead of fans and LEDs, you get oil lamps and the dry, ancient dust that clings to your nose. A tablet is placed in front of you, and the priest points to a line that has been pressed deeper than the rest. It might be emphasis. It might be anger. The translation is not spoken as a grand announcement. It is spoken softly, as if the walls are listening. It is a description of conflict among the divine, not a metaphor, not a poetic "the storm god wrestled the clouds" kind of thing. It reads like factions, like rival households, like alliances, like the kind of bickering that ends with somebody flipping a table. Except the table is the sky. You think, for a moment, of the Sumerian cityscape outside. Flat rooftops, canals, market stalls, a wall that tries to keep chaos out. The gods in these texts look less like distant perfection and more like a mirror held up to the politics of the time. That is one of the weird truths of ancient mythology. Sometimes it is cosmic. Sometimes it is painfully local. Sometimes it is both at once, like a thunderstorm that also happens to be about land rights. The priest mentions that scribes compile lists of divine names the way modern people compile contact lists. The name matters, the title matters, the order matters. And when the order shifts, it is not just theology, it is power. Here comes the quirky tidbit, and it is the kind that makes you snort quietly and then feel guilty because you are in a sacred archive. In Sumerian school exercises, students sometimes practice writing by copying lists, including lists of gods, and they also practice writing insults and complaints. There are tablets where someone basically writes, "My teacher is mean," in a neat academic hand. So yes, the same culture that frames the cosmos in divine hierarchy also produces the ancient equivalent of a grumpy note passed in class. Civilization is consistent like that. The junior scribe wets his stylus and starts a new line. The sound is gentle, a scratch that makes your eyelids heavy. It is bedtime friendly. If you ignore the part where the content hints at celestial warfare, the senior scribe keeps translating, and you realize these tablets are not one clean narrative. They are fragments, ritual lines, and mythic episodes that overlap. Some mention a divine assembly that meets to decide fates. Some describe a god refusing an order. Some talk about a sacred object taken from a temple, which in this world is not theft so much as a political statement. The priest says that when a city rises, its patron god rises with it. When a city falls, people do not always say, "Our god failed." They might say, "Our god withdrew," or "Our god was compelled," or "Our god was deceived." It keeps the relationship intact. It keeps the universe from feeling like a badly managed household. But in these rare lines, the excuses thin out. You notice a phrase that repeats, "The great ones set their faces against each other." It is a human expression, like someone choosing a fight in the street. The gods in these lines are not abstract forces. They are decision makers. They argue. They scheme. They demand tribute. They punish. They bargain. It is unsettling because you have been trained to imagine gods as above needs, above logistics, above petty rivalry. Here, divinity looks like a court full of proud nobles. Historians still argue whether these conflict motifs are literal memories of political upheaval encoded into myth, or whether they are purely symbolic dramas meant to explain why one cult becomes dominant over another. The argument matters because it changes what you think you are hearing. Are you listening to a cosmic epic or a clever, dangerous commentary on shifting power in the river valleys? The priest points to a final line on the tablet. It is short. The scribe's hand has tightened there, wedges pressed firm, as if the clay needed to feel the weight of it. The translation suggests that a boundary was drawn, that something once open is now sealed. A gate in the heavens is closed, not physically like a door, but ritually, politically, spiritually. The gods are still present, but a certain kind of closeness is gone, like a friend who used to drop by unannounced and now only sends formal messages. You swallow, and the archive feels colder, not because of supernatural fear, because of the implication that even a divine world can change its rules. The junior scribe looks up and catches your eye, then looks away fast, like he just remembered you are not supposed to be here. His clay tablet sits unfinished, a line of wedges that could become anything, a hymn or a receipt or a secret that makes priests whisper. You want to tell him to relax. You want to tell him it will all be fine. But you also know this is how worlds tilt. Quietly, in a room full of records, and somewhere outside, the reeds keep rattling in the night wind, sounding almost like applause, or warning, or the world trying to speak in the only language it has. You step out into warm night air that tastes faintly of river mud and hearth smoke. The sky is a deep bowl of ink, pricked with stars that look too steady to be real, like someone nailed them in place and forgot to take the scaffolding down. A guard at the temple gate watches you pass with the bored authority of a man who has seen every kind of pilgrim, thief and nervous scholar. He does not ask who you are. In cities like this, confidence is a passport. Also, the rule is simple. If you look like you have a job to do, people assume you do. It is the oldest life hack in history. Uruk lies around you in layers of sound. Water slaps softly against canal walls. Dogs bark, then stop, as if they remembered they have a bedtime. Somewhere a donkey complains in a long, offended bray, which is honestly the most human thing you will hear all night. You walk along baked brick streets that still hold the day's heat, and every few steps you catch the smell of bread cooling, beer fermenting, and sheep that have no interest in personal space. Here is the mainstream fact that anchors this part. Uruk is one of the great early cities of southern Mesopotamia, known for its monumental architecture and for the stories tied to kings like Gilgamesh. This is a place that knows how to build big and tell bigger stories about why it deserves to exist. The wall looms ahead, not just as a defensive structure, but as a statement. Brick on brick, it says, "We are here, we are organized, and we do not plan to be erased by the next flood, famine, or ambitious neighbor." You press your palm to the surface. The bricks feel gritty, uneven, and alive with the day's dust. You cannot help imagining how many hands have touched this wall, how many arguments were settled under its shadow, how many prayers were whispered into its cracks. A city like this does not separate politics from religion. The patron deity is not a private belief. The patron deity is the city's brand, its shield, its reason for being. When a ruler commissions a wall, he is not only protecting people, he is proving that the god of this city stands strong. When a temple expands, it is not only a place of worship, it is a declaration of power. You move past a courtyard where a few men and women sit with cups, talking in low voices. Their laughter is soft, careful, like they do not want to wake the gods. One person gestures toward the temple district with a look that says, "They are always watching." Another replies with a shrug that says, "Yes, and they also want their offerings on time." Ancient piety can be sincere and practical in the same breath. A small shrine sits at a corner, a simple niche with a figurine and a bowl of something that might be dates, or maybe it is just dust trying its best. Someone has left a tiny clay model of a boat. You understand the message without needing translation. Please keep the water calm. Please let the canals behave. Please do not let my family drown because the river woke up cranky. Then you notice something that makes you slow down. A line of fresh brickwork on a wall nearby, newer than the rest, with a short inscription pressed into it. It is not a grand royal boast. It is more like a slogan, the kind you put where people will see it daily. You cannot read it, but a passerby, an older woman carrying a bundle of reeds, mutters the meaning as she walks. Her voice is half respectful, half irritated. She says it is about the city's god standing above rivals, about enemies being humbled, about a divine decision that cannot be contested. It is phrased like a hymn, but it lands like propaganda. You feel it then. The way myth can be used like a weapon, not a sword. A story. A story that tells you who is allowed to win, who deserves to rule, and why the universe agrees. A street vendor calls out quietly, offering roasted barley cakes. You buy one because you are not brave enough to face history on an empty stomach. It is dry, crumbly, and somehow comforting. If you ever wonder what ancient life is like, start with this. People eat, people complain, people try to sell you snacks. Even when the sky is full of gods, somebody is still running a small business. You wander toward the edge of the temple district, where the buildings become taller, more formal. Here the lamps burn brighter, the doorways are guarded, the air smells of incense and animal fat and the sharp mineral tang of wet clay. Scribes pass carrying tablets in baskets, walking fast, like they are late for a meeting with destiny. A man in a fine wool robe pauses near you, listening to a priest recite a short line. It is a blessing for stability, for order, for the city's god to keep the world arranged correctly. The man nods, then asks a question that sounds simple, but is loaded. He asks whether the great ones are aligned. The priest does not answer directly. He says the omens are being read. He says the rituals are being performed. He says the city's god is strong, all reassuring, none specific. The man's jaw tightens as if he wanted more. He walks away with the posture of someone who has to make decisions without certainty, which is basically every leader, ever ancient or modern. You drift closer to a public notice area where announcements are sometimes proclaimed. A group of young men are arguing about a recent festival, about who got the best portion of meat, about which priest sang out of tune. Then one of them lowers his voice and mentions something that makes the others stop smiling. He says a story is spreading, that the gods fought among themselves, that a divine assembly broke into factions, and that some cities are claiming their patron deity won a right to command the others. The words are not blasphemous in their tone. They are excited, almost proud. It is like sports talk, except the teams are cosmic powers and the scoreboard is the fate of your harvest. The quirky tidbit slips in here like a mischievous cat. In Mesopotamia, people used clay figurines in rituals, sometimes burying them as protective magic against evil forces. There are times when these figurines are called substitutes for threats, like you can trick danger into taking the wrong target. It is the ancient version of putting a decoy package on your porch. So when people talk about gods fighting, they also talk about ways to dodge the fallout, because nobody wants divine collateral damage. You watch a child run past holding a small lump of clay, laughing. He smacks it against a wall and it sticks, leaving a smear somewhere. A scribe's soul just left his body. You almost laugh out loud, then stop, because it is late, and the city feels like it is listening. You keep it to a sleepy smile. You turn toward the wall again, tracing its curve, and you notice something else. Not the wall itself, but the way people talk about it. They do not describe it only as bricks. They talk about it as proof that the city's god has set a boundary, that chaos is kept out, that order is enforced. The wall becomes theology you can touch. Historians still argue whether these grand city projects were driven primarily by practical defense and labor organization, or whether the symbolic religious role was the true engine that motivated people to build at such scale. You can feel both possibilities in your bones right now, or the wall protects. The wall also preaches. A low chant rises from within the temple district, a group of voices repeating a phrase that sounds like a promise. The cadence is hypnotic. You catch a translated fragment from someone nearby. It speaks of a throne in the heavens, of a rightful seat, of a judgment that cannot be appealed. It is soothing until you realize what it implies. If a throne has a rightful owner, then someone else was pushed away. You walk, and the stars keep their distance. The canal water glimmers like dark glass. The city's bricks radiate warmth like a sleeping animal. Somewhere, a priest is turning pages of clay with careful hands. Somewhere, a king is listening to advisors who speak in the language of gods and grain. And you keep moving through Uruk's night, feeling the weight of stories that do not just entertain, but organize the world, deciding who gets to call their god victorious. You slip into a side street where the lamps are fewer and the shadows do more talking. The air cools a little, and the smell changes from incense to damp reeds and the sour bite of tanner pits somewhere downwind. A small doorway sits half hidden behind stacked jars, the kind of entrance that looks accidental unless you know exactly what you are looking for. A young man waits there, hands tucked into his sleeves, eyes flicking around like he expects trouble to arrive early and bring friends. He nods at you once and steps inside without a word. You follow, because apparently your nightly hobby is walking into suspicious rooms for educational purposes. If anyone asks, you are doing field research, which is the polite way to say I make poor choices, but I commit fully. Inside is a scribal workshop, smaller than the temple archive and far less official. The walls are plain mud brick, the floor packed earth. The light comes from a single lamp and a brazier that glows like a tired orange eye. The heat makes the room smell of wet clay, crushed reeds, and a faint metallic tang from ink or mineral pigment. A table holds lumps of clay covered with damp cloth. Nearby, a basket is filled with styluses, reed pens, and scraps of practice tablets, most of them covered in drills of signs and numbers. The young man introduces himself in the way people do when they are not sure if introductions are safe. Not a full name, just a role. Apprentice, copyist, someone who writes what older men tell him to write. He sits and gestures for you to sit too, then points at a tablet in front of him as if it might bite. He explains that scribes are trained with discipline that borders on obsession. They memorize signs, lists of words, lists of names, lists of gods. They copy proverbs, contracts, and hymns until their wrists ache. This is the mainstream fact for tonight. In Mesopotamian cities, scribal education is formal and demanding, and scribes become essential to administration, law, and religion. If you can write, you can shape reality, because everything important eventually becomes a tablet. The apprentice's hands shake slightly as he picks up a stylus. He presses the tip to clay, then stops, breathing through his nose like he is trying to settle himself. He tells you there are clean texts and unclean texts. Clean ones are public, safe, approved. Unclean ones are not dirty in a bodily way. They are dangerous in a political way. They contain claims that could start arguments in temples, or worse, make the wrong people feel insulted. He does not say who the wrong people are. You get the sense he means both humans and gods. It is a room where superstition and realism sit on the same stool, sharing the lamplight like they split rent. He slides the tablet toward you. The wedges look fresh, still sharp at the edges. This is not a relic. This is active work. You can see where he hesitated, where a sign is slightly warped because his hand paused mid-press. There is a short heading, a few lines, then a section that has been scraped and rewritten. The clay bears scars. He whispers a translation he's been taught not to repeat. It describes a divine emissary arriving with an ultimatum, not a polite request, an order. A god is demanded to surrender a symbol of authority, a sacred object that grants command. The apprentice's voice is thin, like he is speaking through a doorway and hoping nobody hears. You watch him glance toward the wall, then the ceiling, then the lamp, like the whole room has ears. He laughs once, a quick, nervous sound, and says it is ridiculous, because the gods are supposed to be eternal and stable, not arguing over objects like children fighting over a shiny toy. Then he stops laughing abruptly, as if he remembered the gods might take jokes personally. Ancient humor has very strict risk management. He explains the tablet is part of a copying assignment given by a senior scribe who likes puzzles. That is apprentice code for likes trouble. The senior scribe told him to practice a text fragment that comes from a ritual context. But the fragment includes lines that do not fit the public hymns. It sounds like the gods are divided. It sounds like some have defected. It sounds like there was a moment when divine authority changed hands. The quirky tidbit lands here, and it is delightfully petty. In some scribal school exercises, students copy mock legal disputes and complaint letters, sometimes accusing someone of stealing or not paying what they owe. There are even texts that read like practice lawsuits. So scribes train by writing conflict on purpose. It is possible this apprentice is being trained with a text that functions like a case study in cosmic law, a divine argument turned into a teaching tool. You can almost hear a teacher saying, "Copy this, and do not ask why." You ask, softly, why he would copy something forbidden. He looks at you like the answer is obvious. He says scribes do not always get to choose. They serve temples, palaces, and powerful families. Sometimes they are asked to preserve things precisely because they are risky. People with power love having knowledge that others do not. It is like keeping a key to a door everyone else pretends is not there. He points to the scraped section on the clay. He tells you he wrote a line that described a god falling silent in the assembly. Then he panicked and erased it. He replaced it with a softer phrase, something like withheld speech. It is the same idea, but it feels less final, less humiliating, less like defeat. That is when you understand how myth can be edited in real time, not with a grand council decree, with a trembling hand and a decision about which verb is safer. Historians still argue whether the variations in these mythic texts are mainly the result of ordinary scribal transmission and regional preferences, or whether they reflect deliberate ideological revision by temples and rulers who wanted divine narratives to support human politics. Sitting here with an apprentice who has literally scraped away a dangerous phrase. You suspect the second option gets more votes than people are comfortable admitting. The apprentice reaches into a basket and pulls out a small object wrapped in cloth. He unwraps it carefully. It is a cylinder seal, carved with tiny figures, the kind used to roll an image onto wet clay like a signature. He tells you it belongs to his family, passed down, and it shows a scene of a deity standing over a kneeling figure. It is not clear if the kneeling one is a human or another god. The ambiguity is the point. It can mean many things, depending on who is looking. He rolls the seal gently over a scrap of clay. The image appears, crisp and delicate. A god, tall, horned crown, raised hand, a smaller figure, bent, a symbol that looks like a star, a plant, or maybe a weapon. The apprentice says people assume such seals show divine blessing of kingship, but some scribes whisper that certain scenes echo a much older story, a moment when divine rank was contested. He looks at you and asks, very quietly, if you think gods can lose, The question is not theological, it is existential. Because if gods can lose, then order is not guaranteed. Then cities can fall not only because of floods and armies, but because the sky itself has politics. You do not answer quickly. You listen to the crackle of the brazier. The lamp flickers, throwing the apprentice's shadow onto the wall, making him look taller and older, like a priest for a moment. Outside, a dog barks once, and then silence returns. The apprentice tells you the senior scribe said the fragment is connected to a series of lines that never get recited at festivals. The senior scribe hinted there was a war of voices in the heavens, a struggle fought with decrees, names, and rituals. Not all battles are fought with spears. Some are fought with authority, with who gets to speak first, who gets to decide what is real. He taps the tablet with his stylus, then sets the stylus down like it is hot. He says the fragment ends with a warning. If the wrong name is spoken in the wrong order, the boundary between divine and human could thin. He is not sure if he believes it, but he is sure enough to avoid testing it. That is the ancient version of not clicking a suspicious link. He laughs again, this time a little steadier, and says, "Scribes have a saying, clay remembers." He is proud of that line, and he should be. It is catchy. It is also terrifying. You stand to leave, and the apprentice hurriedly covers the tablet with cloth as if hiding it will make it less real. He walks you back to the doorway and pauses. In the dim light, his face looks older than it should. He says one more thing, almost like a confession. He says the fragment makes it sound like the gods were forced to accept a new silence, a new distance, because the conflict among them made the world unstable. The solution was not peace, it was separation, a tightening of access, a closing of something that used to be open. You step back into the street. The night air hits your face and feels cleaner than the workshop. But the city is still the city, full of whispers and walls and people trying to sleep under a sky that might have its own arguments. And as you walk away, your mind keeps returning to the apprentice's scraped line. That tiny act of editing that suggests the most dangerous wars are not always the ones fought loudly, but the ones fought in a quiet room, on a soft slab of clay, while someone's hand shakes. You wake into the early grey that is not quite dawn, that soft in-between light, where the city looks less like a proud monument and more like a tired animal stretching. The air is cooler now. Moisture hangs over the canals and turns every brick surface slightly darker, as if Uruk has pulled a blanket over itself. Somewhere, a rooster is trying to start a revolution with its voice. Nobody has agreed to join it. A runner passes, bare feet slapping the packed earth, carrying a small sealed bundle. He does not look at you. His focus is straight ahead, like the message is heavier than his body. You follow at a distance, not stalking exactly, more like drifting in the same direction, the way you drift toward the smell of coffee in a modern city. This is not coffee, sadly. This is administrative urgency. The runner turns into a courtyard attached to a building that looks less like a shrine and more like an office. The doorway is wide, the interior full of benches, baskets, and scribes already working. Here, religion is not the only thing happening. This is the place where numbers become power. A man in a simple robe sits at a low table, sorting small clay tokens, each token shaped to represent a commodity. He slides them into a clay envelope, seals it, then writes on the outside, accounting, but with more clay and fewer spreadsheets. The mainstream fact for this part is simple and sturdy. Early writing in Mesopotamia is tightly tied to economic administration. Temples and palaces organize labor, store grain, distribute rations, and record obligations. The gods are fed, but so are the workers, and both require ledgers. A senior administrator, hair bound neatly, directs a team of scribes. He speaks in short, clipped phrases. Count again? Record the measure? Seal the jar? His voice is calm, but his eyes move fast. You notice the tablets on the table are not hymns. They are lists, barley allotments, beer rations, sheep counts, labor days. Then, in the middle of these practical lines, a column appears with a header that makes the scribes shift in their seats. It is the name of a deity, not as a recipient of offerings, but as a unit of allocation, almost like the god has a budget line. You lean in, and you start to see what the numbers imply. There are shipments moving between cities, and the notes include temple names, shrine officials, and dates tied to festivals. At first, it looks like routine redistribution. Then you notice a strange pattern. Certain temples are receiving more grain than usual, and certain others are receiving less. Some shipments are delayed, some are rerouted, some are marked with urgent seals. It feels like watching a map form out of columns. Supply routes, priorities, allies. You realize the divine conflict you've been hearing about is not only mythic talk. It has a physical footprint in the economy. If a temple gains status, it gains resources. If a god's cult rises, its priests eat better. If a city's patron deity becomes more important, the city's rulers can justify demanding more tribute from surrounding settlements. And suddenly, you are looking at warfare. Not with spears yet, but with grain. The administrator notices your gaze and gives you a look that says, "Do not touch anything." It is the ancient version of, "Do not lean on the glass." You keep your hands to yourself and try to look innocent, which is difficult when your face is screaming curiosity. A young scribe reads aloud a line about barley distribution, then pauses, frowning. He points to a mark that indicates a special allocation for a ritual event connected to a dispute. The word used is not festival. It is closer to appeasement. That is the kind of word that makes everyone quietly look at each other, because it suggests something is wrong enough to require calming. A priest enters, not in full ceremonial dress, but in practical clothing. He speaks with the administrator privately. You catch fragments. Uncertain omens. Prepare extra. Send to the river shrine. Do not announce. The priest's voice is controlled, but his jaw clenches on certain words, like he is biting down on fear. Here comes the quirky tidbit, and it is oddly charming. Beer is a standard ration in Mesopotamia, and it is not only for fun. It is calories, hydration, and a safer drink than questionable water. So when you see beer rations listed beside labor assignments, it is the ancient world admitting that civilization runs on fermented grain and group projects. If the gods are getting extra beer offerings, You can almost hear them saying, "Fine, we will talk, but bring snacks." You follow a clerk as he carries a basket of tablets to a storage area. The storage is cool and smells like dried grain and old reeds. Large jars line the walls, sealed with clay stoppers stamped by cylinder seals. The clerk checks seals carefully, because a broken seal is not just theft. It is a scandal. It is a challenge to authority. He stops at one jar and hesitates. The seal impression shows a symbol associated with a temple in another city. The clerk mutters something about their people again. It is not friendly. It is the kind of phrase that divides the world into us and them. You ask softly why the jar is here. He tells you the temple has received a transfer. He says it was ordered. He does not say by whom. He looks upward briefly, the way people do when the ultimate boss is invisible. Then he adds, almost as an afterthought, that the order came with a warning. Do not delay, do not substitute, do not bargain. You imagine how a divine order becomes a human logistics problem. Someone has to count the grain, someone has to load the cart, someone has to guard it on the road. Someone has to explain to hungry workers why their ration is smaller this week. The divine argument ripples downward into stomachs. Historians still argue whether temple economies primarily serve religious devotion or whether they function as central institutions of power and redistribution that use religion to legitimize control. Standing here, watching rations turn into leverage, you feel the answer is probably both, braided together so tightly you cannot separate them without breaking the rope. A messenger arrives with a tablet in his hands, still damp at the edges, as if it was sealed in haste. The administrator breaks the seal, reads, and his expression shifts from routine to tight concern. He calls for 2 scribes. He points to a line. They copy it onto separate tablets, quickly, carefully, with the urgency of people who know mistakes have consequences. You catch a glimpse of a phrase in the copied text that is not about barley or sheep. It is about a journey of the divine emblem. That phrase makes your throat go dry. An emblem is not a casual object. It is authority made tangible. If an emblem is traveling, then something is being transferred, demanded, or stolen. And if it is divine, then the stakes are not only political, they are cosmic. Outside, carts creak as they are loaded. The wheels are wooden, the axles squeal, and the donkeys look offended to be awake this early. A guard checks straps. A priest mutters a short blessing over the load, more practical than poetic. It sounds like. Please do not let this tip over. But with divine vocabulary, you walk alongside the convoy as it starts to move. The road is still quiet, but you sense watchers, people at doorways, people pretending to sweep, people noticing which direction the carts go. Information travels faster than wheels. The administrator returns to his table and begins reorganizing lists, shifting allocations, rewriting schedules. It is a quiet scramble, like someone rearranging furniture while pretending the house is not on fire. And you understand, with a sleepy clarity, that a war among gods does not stay in the sky. It turns into supply lines. It turns into shortages and surpluses. It turns into sealed jars and urgent orders. It turns into the kind of quiet tension where nobody says war, but everybody starts counting what they have. You find yourself walking northward until the streets thin and the city's voice becomes softer, like someone lowering the volume because the neighbors complained. The horizon shifts from dense rooftops to open stretches where fields begin, divided by canals that glint with early light. Birds skim the water and then vanish into reeds, as if they have a schedule you are not invited to. Your feet pick up dust, and your mind starts to float in that half-awake, half-dream state, where every sound feels meaningful. A small procession moves along a canal path ahead of you. Not a festival, no drums, no big crowd, just a handful of priests, a few attendants carrying baskets, and one person holding a covered object close to the chest as if it is a sleeping child. They head toward a place that looks like a raised mound of brick and packed earth, crowned by a modest shrine. A local tells you it is a way station, a sacred point linked to Nippur, the city where one of the greatest temples in Mesopotamia stands. The mainstream fact that settles into your bones here is that Nippur is a major religious center, especially associated with Enlil, often treated as a chief authority in the divine order. Whether kings like it or not, the temple there carries immense prestige. Even if you are not physically inside Nippur at this moment, its gravity pulls on rituals across the land, like a moon tugging tides. The priests you follow speak quietly. Their words aren't casual chatter. They are counting, reciting, checking steps. Ritual is a kind of technology. If you do it correctly, you believe it produces stability. If you do it wrong, you fear the whole world might wobble. That is a stressful way to live, but it does keep you detail-oriented. They reach the shrine. The covered object is placed on a low altar. The cloth is lifted, revealing a small symbol crafted from metal and stone, shaped like a stylized standard, topped with a sign that suggests authority. It is not huge. The power is not in the size. It is in what it represents. Your skin tingles with the sense that this is one of those objects that makes people argue about legitimacy, like a crown, a seal, a flag. Except, here, it is treated as if it is alive. A priest begins to speak a long recitation. His voice rises and falls in a pattern that makes your eyelids heavy. The words, translated in your mind, describe heaven as a structure that can be maintained or damaged. The sky is not just space. It is a roof. A roof can crack. Then the wind changes. It is subtle at first, just a shift that makes the reeds hiss. The lamp flames wobble. A dog far off starts barking, then another, and then the barking stops all at once, like someone pinched the sound out of the air. The priests freeze. You feel it too, that sudden thickening of the atmosphere, like the moment before a storm. But there is no cloud wall rolling in. The sky remains clear. The tension comes from something else, something that feels like a pressure on your temples. The lead priest whispers a phrase that translates loosely as the bond is strained. He signals to the attendants, and they bring out bowls of water, small piles of flour, and a bundle of reeds. The priest sprinkles water in a careful circle. He draws a line in flour. He ties the reeds together in a knot that looks simple, but is done with intense concentration. Like he is tying the universe's shoelaces, this is where the idea hits you. The ritual is not only worship, it is repair work. A second priest approaches the standard on the altar and touches it lightly with 2 fingers, then recoils as if the metal is hot. His face goes pale. He says a word that makes the others stiffen. The translation that comes to you is split. Not split as in broken object. Split as in divided authority. Split as in a fracture in the chain of command. The priests start reciting faster, like speeding up a lullaby to keep a child from waking angry. The rhythm becomes urgent. The words call on the divine assembly to hold together. They call on heaven to remain sealed. They call on the great temple in Nippur to steady the order of things. The quirky tidbit slips in, strange and almost sweet. In some Mesopotamian rituals, priests use figurines or symbolic items as stand-ins for threats, then ritually neutralize them. It is not about literal physical combat. It is about redirecting danger into something manageable. So when these priests tie reeds and draw flower lines, they may be doing the same kind of symbolic engineering, hoping the universe will accept the substitute and leave the real world alone. A gust of wind comes again, stronger, and you hear something that should not be possible. A low, distant rumble, like thunder trapped under the earth. It is brief. The priests do not look at the sky. They look upward as if they are looking through the sky. They look like people who have just heard a crack in a ceiling and are praying it does not collapse. A messenger arrives breathless, running along the canal path. He carries a small tablet and a sealed cord. The lead priest breaks the seal and reads. His shoulders drop slightly, but not in relief, more like in resignation. He announces to the group that the signs have been read at another shrine, and the reading confirms contention among the great ones. He does not say who is contending. He does not say why. He says only that the contention is strong enough to be felt in ritual work. Historians still argue whether reports of cosmic disturbance in these texts reflect actual experiences of natural events like storms, earthquakes, or unusual celestial phenomena, or whether they are deliberately framed as divine conflict to make political and religious shifts feel inevitable and meaningful. Right now, your body does not care which explanation is correct. Your body hears the rumble and believes in consequence. The lead priest orders a specific rite. He calls for a binding of the mouths, a ritual phrase that sounds odd until you consider its purpose. If divine speech makes reality, then divine argument might break reality. So the ritual tries to limit speech, to silence the harmful declarations, to make the divine world stop shouting long enough for the sky roof to stop shaking. The attendants place small clay cups around the altar, each with a bit of oil. They light them, one by one. The flames form a ring of tiny stars around the standard. The priest recites names in a careful sequence, like reading a list of emergency contacts. He pauses on one name longer than the others, then moves on quickly, like he's stepping around a hole in the ground. A third priest produces a thin strip of gold or bronze, inscribed with tiny signs. He holds it up to the light, then presses it against the standard as if sealing a wound. The metal makes a soft click. The priests exhale together, like a group that has been holding breath, without realizing. The wind calms, the reeds settle. The dogs do not resume barking. The air feels lighter, not peaceful, exactly. More like the moment after someone closes a door in a house where an argument was happening. The argument might still exist behind the door, but at least it is muffled. The lead priest speaks to you, not with friendliness, but with the flat seriousness of someone who has been forced to become calm for survival. He says heaven can be strengthened, but not forever. He says the great ones are not united. He says humans must keep performing the rites, because if the divine world fractures too far, humans will feel it in floods, in drought, in the failure of kings, in the sickness of herds. He lists disasters the way an administrator lists supplies, as if calamity is a predictable inventory item. He then gives a final instruction to the attendants. The standard must travel under guard. The route must avoid public notice. The object must not be seen by certain eyes. It must not be named in casual conversation. The lead priest does not explain, but his voice says, enough. In a world where names carry power, secrecy is a kind of shield. You stand beside the canal as the small procession reforms. The covered object is lifted again, held tight, and they begin to move, disappearing into the brightening morning. The shrine remains behind, quiet and ordinary, like nothing happened. That is the unsettling part. The world can tremble and still look normal. And you walk away with the sensation that the sky itself is not just a backdrop, but a structure, under strain, held together by ritual hands and whispered names, as if the war among the gods is pressing down from above, and the humans below are doing desperate maintenance with water bowls and reed knots. You drift into a district where water and brick live side by side, where canals cut through the city like dark ribbons, and the air always carries a cool breath. The sun is higher now, but the streets here feel shaded and secretive. Reeds sway in baskets. Fishermen mend nets with fingers that move like they have their own memory. A boat glides past, shallow and quiet, and the oar makes a small, soothing creak that could put you to sleep if your brain were not busy chewing on divine politics like it is a tough piece of dried meat. A man with a sun-cracked face gestures for you to step aside as two officials pass. Their belts carry seals, and their expressions carry the kind of seriousness that says, "We are about to tell someone important, something they do not want to hear." They head toward a temple complex near the water, one associated with deep places, fresh springs, and clever solutions. People around here speak the name Enki, with a familiarity that feels almost friendly. When they mention Enlil, the tone changes, more formal, more careful, like talking about a boss who might be listening. The mainstream fact for this part is that in Mesopotamian mythology, Enlil is often associated with authority, wind, and command, while Enki is associated with water, wisdom, and craft. Their stories sometimes show tension between strict order and clever workaround, even if myths change over time and place. The contrast between their roles is a recurring engine for drama. You enter the waterside temple courtyard. It is cooler inside, shaded by reed awnings. A basin sits near the entrance, and people wash their hands in a practiced way, not only for cleanliness, but for ritual readiness. The water is startlingly cold. It jolts you awake for a second, then leaves your skin tingling. A priest here greets you with a half smile, not warm, not hostile, more like he's amused that anyone walks into a temple looking this curious. He points toward a stone channel where water flows in a thin stream, and he says, The god's presence is felt in the steady movement of water. You can almost hear the message. Do not panic. Water knows how to keep moving. Inside a side room, scribes and priests sit around a low table covered in tablets. These are not the grain lists you saw elsewhere. These are ritual instructions, omen interpretations, and prayers that read like technical manuals for reality. A senior priest holds a tablet and speaks to the officials who arrived earlier. The officials explain that certain rites are being requested, and not the ordinary ones. They want a rite to smooth contention. They use a phrase that suggests turning rough stone into polished stone. The priest raises an eyebrow and asks whose contention. The officials hesitate. That hesitation is loud. Finally, one of them says it is among the great ones, and he says it with the same tone someone uses to mention a family feud at a dinner table. You do not say names if you want dessert. The priest of Enki nods slowly, then says something that makes the room go very still. He says there is a difference between authority and inevitability. He says even the highest command can be redirected if you understand the hidden channels. You can feel the comfort in his words, and the danger too. Comfort, because it implies solutions exist. Danger, because it implies authority can be bypassed. He orders water to be brought, not for washing, but for mixing with clay. An apprentice kneels and mixes a small bowl of river mud until it becomes smooth. The priest speaks a short incantation, then presses a seal into the clay. The seal impression shows a coiled serpent, or maybe a flowing river line, something that implies cunning movement. The priest says this tablet will be carried as a kind of legal petition to the divine assembly. Yes, you are watching someone draft a cosmic complaint letter. You cannot help smiling, and then you immediately stop smiling because you are in a temple, and you would like to keep your eyebrows unstruck by lightning. The quirky tidbit for this part makes you breathe out a quiet laugh. Some Mesopotamian stories present Enki as a trickster type who solves problems with cleverness, sometimes even getting other gods drunk to achieve his goals. It is like the universe's most ancient office party strategy. If you cannot win the argument, maybe you can make everyone too tipsy to remember their objections. The priest speaks to the officials again, and he suggests a plan that sounds like diplomacy with a hidden knife. He will send offerings that honor Enlil's authority, but he will also include a set of ritual phrases that create room for compromise, not open defiance, a loophole, the kind of loophole that lets everyone save face. You follow as a small group prepares the offering: bread, beer, oil, and a small crafted object, maybe a miniature boat or a symbol of flowing water. The package is wrapped and sealed. The priest instructs the messengers to approach with humility, to speak the names in correct order, and to avoid a certain phrase that could be interpreted as challenge. It is striking how much of this is about language. Who speaks first? Which title is used? Which name is paired with which epithet? It is the ancient version of writing an email, where you spend 10 minutes deciding if best is too cold, but warmly is too much. Except here, the stakes are cosmic. Historians still argue whether the portrayal of tension between these gods reflects older religious traditions being merged and negotiated across cities, or whether it is a literary device used by priests and scribes to explore questions of power, justice, and survival. The debate stays alive because the myths do not behave like simple propaganda. They contain contradictions, humor, and moments where authority looks fragile. A disturbance rises outside the temple, not a riot, but a crowd gathering. You step into the courtyard and see people looking toward the sky with narrowed eyes. Someone points. At first you see nothing. Then you notice a thin streak of cloud cutting across the blue, oddly straight, like a line drawn with a reed pen. It is not dramatic enough to be a storm. It is just strange enough to unsettle. A woman whispers that the wind has been arguing since dawn. Another man says he heard his door creak in a rhythm that sounded like a warning. A child says the water tasted different. Adults hush the child quickly, because children say things you cannot unsay. The priest of Enki watches the skyline and says quietly that signs can be read many ways. He suggests the crowd return to their work, but he also tells an attendant to prepare an additional rite, one that involves pouring water at a boundary point where canal meets wall. The symbolism is clear. If conflict is rising, you reinforce borders. The officials return to their urgent walk, carrying the sealed offering and the petition tablet. Their faces are tight, but there is a new layer in their posture. Not confidence, exactly. More like hope, that cleverness might buy time. As you leave the water district, you pass a small shrine where someone has carved a crude image of a wave and a wind swirl facing each other. It is not official art. It is street-level theology. Someone has felt the tension and turned it into a symbol. You keep walking, and the city falls both ordinary and charged. People bargain for fish. People sweep doorways. People argue about prices. And above all that, invisible, the great ones jostle for authority, with one side leaning on command and the other leaning on cunning, and humans moving between them like messengers, trying to carry a bowl of water without spilling a single drop. You find the workshop by following a sound that is half music, half violence. Hammer on metal. Tap, tap, pause. Then a heavier strike that makes your teeth buzz. The street outside smells of charcoal and hot copper, and the air shimmers as if the heat itself is practicing a dance. A boy sits on a step, fanning a small forge, and his face is smudged black except for clean lines where sweat has carved paths down his cheeks. He watches you with the wary look of someone guarding a secret recipe. Inside, the metalworker's space is cramped and bright, lit by flame and reflected glints. Tools hang on the wall. Tongs, hammers, moulds. A trough of water sits ready for quenching, and the steam that rises from it gives the room a ghostly breath. A man with thick forearms and a shaved head stands over an anvil, shaping a piece of bronze with a calm focus that makes it look easy. It is not easy. It is skill. It is obsession. It is a lifetime of making sure your work does not fail at the worst possible moment. He pauses when he sees you and wipes his hands on a rag. His eyes flick toward your belt, your hands, your posture, assessing whether you are here to buy, to steal, or to complain, when you do not look like any of those. He grunts and gestures toward a low bench. Sit. Do not touch. Do not breathe too loudly near the hot metal. Fair. A priest arrives while you are settling, and the atmosphere shifts. The metalworker straightens. The priest does not bow, but his posture carries authority that does not need decoration. He brings a small tablet, sealed, and a bundle wrapped in cloth. He sets both on the bench like placing a sleeping animal down gently. The mainstream fact here is that Mesopotamian temples maintain inventories of sacred objects and ritual equipment, and skilled craftsmen are commissioned to create and repair items used in worship and ceremony. These objects are not just pretty. They are functional within the religious system. They hold meaning the way a seal holds identity. The priest breaks the tablet seal and reads aloud instructions. The metalworker listens, expression flat, but his fingers twitch slightly as if he is already measuring in his mind. The priest then unwraps the cloth to reveal a metal fitting, tarnished, with a small inset stone that has cracked. The object is shaped like a socket or mount, meant to hold something upright. A standard, maybe. A ceremonial weapon, a symbol of authority. The cracked stone looks like an eye that has been injured. The priest says it must be repaired quickly and correctly. He uses a phrase that is more chilling than dramatic. He calls it the mouth of the emblem. If the emblem speaks through ritual, then its mouth cannot be broken. The metalworker leans in, squinting at the crack. He runs a thumb along it, then pulls back, as if respecting it. He asks what happened. The priest does not answer directly. He says only that the object has been strained by contention. He says the object must be strengthened so it can withstand the pressure of divine presence. The metalworker nods with the slow patience of someone who has heard enough to stop asking questions. Then the priest asks for something else. Not a repair, but a new piece. A blade, small enough to carry, inscribed with specific signs, not a battle sword, more like a ritual knife, used to cut reeds, open offerings, mark boundaries. The priest says it will be used in a rite of separation. The phrase makes your neck prickle. Separation is not a word you like when you are talking about gods. The metalworker opens a chest and pulls out ingots, selecting one with care. He holds it to the light, then scratches it with a tool, checking quality. He explains, quietly, that not all bronze is the same. Some pores are weak, some are impure. A sacred blade cannot be made from bad metal, because failure would be interpreted as a sign. Imagine being blamed by heaven because your alloy ratio was off. That is a stressful performance review. He begins heating the ingot. The furnace roars, and the room fills with a low sound, like an animal breathing. The boy outside fans harder, and the flame brightens. The metalworker speaks as he works, not to entertain you, but because craftsmen often talk to their tools like it helps the world stay aligned. He says temples request objects with precise inscriptions. The signs are not decoration, they are identification. A serial number, a legal claim, a magical seal. If the sign order is wrong, the object might belong to the wrong god, or worse, it might belong to no one, which makes it spiritually homeless. That is, when bad luck moves in, like an unwanted roommate who never pays rent, the quirky tidbit slips in, and it is wonderfully nerdy. Cylinder seals and inscriptions function like identity tech, and people can recognize a specific seal style the way you recognize a brand logo. Some craftsmen develop reputations not only for strength of metal, but for the beauty of their wedge signs. Imagine being famous because your cuneiform looks clean, ancient influences, but with clay instead of ring lights. While the metal heats, the priest consults another tablet, one that looks older, edges worn. He reads a line and frowns, then traces a sign with his finger. The metalworker asks if the inscription needs to match exactly. The priest says yes, and his voice tightens. He says the wording is contested, and he does not want to choose the wrong version. You can hear the tension. Even on a blade, language is a battlefield. Historians still argue whether the weapons mentioned in some ritual and mythic texts were primarily symbolic objects used in ceremonies, or whether they sometimes reflect real militarized practices blended into religion, especially as city-states competed. In this workshop, you see how the same object can serve both worlds. A blade can cut reeds and also represent authority. A standard can stand in a temple and also stand in a procession like a flag. The metalworker pours molten bronze into a mold with steady hands. The liquid glows like captured sunset. He mutters something that sounds like a prayer, but it is probably just a craftsman's superstition. When the metal cools, he cracks open the mold, revealing the rough shape of the blade. He grinds it, files it, sharpens it. Each scrape produces a bright smell, sharp and mineral. Then comes the inscription. The priest presses a small stamp into soft clay to show the exact signs required. The metalworker studies it, then picks up a fine tool and begins incising the signs into the blade's surface. The act is careful, slow, almost tender. It feels intimate, like writing someone's name on a gift, except the gift is a ritual instrument that might help divide divine authority. No pressure. As he works, he speaks quietly about the requests that have increased lately. More boundary markers, more protective fittings, more repairs to temple standards. He says people are nervous. He says priests argue more. He says sometimes a temple sends an order and then cancels it suddenly, as if they change their mind about what kind of protection they need. He shrugs. He doesn't claim to understand the theology. He only knows demand spikes when fear spikes. The priest watches the inscription and then nods, satisfied. He unwraps a second cloth bundle and reveals small metal studs shaped like tiny rosettes. He says they will be attached to a wooden frame, a sacred object that must appear whole and beautiful in public. The metalworker smiles faintly, the first warmth you have seen from him. He likes the rosettes. They are simple, pleasing, and they do not involve contested phrasing. A sudden shout outside makes everyone pause. The boy at the forge door points down the street. A group of men are running, not in panic, but in urgency. One carries a staff with a small symbol tied to it, a messenger staff. The priest's face tightens. He takes the repaired fitting and the new blade, wraps them quickly, and prepares to leave. Before he goes, he says something to the metalworker that sounds like a warning. He says if anyone asks, this work was for ordinary temple maintenance. The metalworker nods without surprise. Of course. Everything is ordinary, until it is not. The priest turns to you, briefly, and his eyes are tired. He says sacred objects are not just tools. They are agreements. They mark who holds authority. They mark who is allowed to speak and act. If those agreements crack, the objects crack too. He does not elaborate. He does not need to. The cracked stone eye in the fitting says, "Enough." You step back into the street as the priest disappears into the crowd, carrying wrapped metal like it is the most fragile thing in the world. The forge roars behind you, steady, relentless. Craft continues. Bread will still bake. Metal will still be shaped. But now you feel the hidden layer under it all. The way even a small blade with a neat row of wedge signs can become part of a struggle that turns the divine world into something like a court full of rivals, each demanding their own emblem, their own seal, their own proof that they still matter. You leave the heat of metalwork behind and follow the smell of wet earth. The city gives way to a landscape that feels softer, more flexible, like it could rearrange itself overnight. Marshlands spread out in shimmering patches. Reed beds sway like they are breathing. Water sits in shallow pools that reflect the sky, and then break into ripples when something moves beneath. The air is full of insects, little buzzing dots of persistence. And every now and then a bird cries out, in a voice that sounds offended by existence. A narrow boat waits at a small dock, tied with a rope that looks older than the person who tied it. A boatman sits with a pole across his knees. His skin is sun-browned, his eyes narrowed against glare. He watches you like you're either a customer or a problem. You offer payment. And he grunts in a way that means yes. His definition of yes is efficient and not emotionally supportive. You step into the boat. It wobbles, and your body does that awkward dance where you try to look graceful while your arms flail like you are auditioning to be a windmill. The boatman does not help. He has seen too many people nearly fall into the water to care. He pushes off with the pole, and the boat slides into the reeds with a hush that immediately makes you quieter too. The marsh feels like a different world. Sound is swallowed. The city's hard lines vanish. Here, everything is half hidden. A path is not a road, but a memory of where someone went last week. A boundary is not a wall, but a shift in water depth. You understand why people who want to hide would choose this place. The marsh does not judge. It just covers you in reeds and dares anyone to find you. The mainstream fact for this part is that southern Mesopotamia includes extensive wetlands and waterways, and movement by boat is common. Marsh environments can support distinct communities, and they can also serve as refuges during political conflict. When power tightens in cities, people often slip into places where power cannot easily follow. The boatman guides you toward a cluster of reed huts built on raised platforms. Smoke rises in thin threads. You hear low voices. The boat slows, and you feel eyes on you. Not hostile exactly, but alert. A man steps onto a narrow walkway, holding a staff. He wears simple clothing, but his staff has a carved symbol near the top, a sign that suggests affiliation. He asks who you are. The boatman answers for you with the most minimal explanation possible. Traveler, curious, not obviously armed. The staff holder studies you, then gestures for you to come. His movement is not welcoming like a host. It is more like a gate opening for inspection. You step onto the walkway, and it sways slightly over the water. The reeds whisper around you. The smell is earthy and sweet, like decaying plant life that is still busy becoming new life. A child peeks from behind a reed wall, eyes wide. A woman hushes the child and watches you with a careful expression. Not fear, but calculation. Outsiders bring news. Outsiders bring risk. In the center of the settlement is a larger hut with a low entrance. Inside, the light is dim and cool. A circle of people sit on mats. In the middle is a shallow bowl of water with a small floating lamp. The flame reflects off the water and makes the whole room feel like it is breathing. Someone speaks a name quietly, and others respond with a phrase that sounds like a pledge. You realize this is not just a village meeting. It is a gathering with purpose. The leader, an older man with a scar across his cheek, speaks in a voice that carries authority without needing volume. He talks about the great ones in a way that is different from city priests. City priests speak like servants of a stable order. This man speaks like someone who has felt that order crack and decided he does not owe it loyalty. He says certain temples have tightened control. He says certain gods are being elevated and others pushed aside. He says the divine hierarchy is being rewritten by people in brick cities who want to justify their rule. His words are political, but they are wrapped in theology, because theology is the language everyone understands. Even rebellion needs a sacred vocabulary. Then he says something that makes the room hush. He says there are older powers, older names, spirits of marsh and deep water, beings who were honored long before city temples grew tall. He says the old ones are being called again. He says if the city gods want to fight and rearrange themselves, the marsh will raise its own host. You feel the hair on your arms lift. It is not just superstition. It is the sense of a counter-narrative forming, a mythic opposition. If a city claims its god is supreme, an outsider group can claim a different god is the true source of authority. That is how you fight propaganda. You produce your own. The quirky tidbit slides in like a fish breaking the surface. In Mesopotamian tradition, there are many classes of supernatural beings beyond the major gods, including protective spirits and dangerous entities associated with disease, chaos, or wilderness. People use amulets, incantations, and figurines to manage them. So when marsh folk talk about old powers, they might be blending local spirits, ancestral deities, and protective figures into a new coalition. It is like assembling a team from every neighborhood legend you have heard, and then claiming they all support your cause. A young woman in the circle holds up a small clay figurine, painted with dark pigment. The figurine has exaggerated eyes. She says it represents a watcher, a guardian, something that sees through reeds and darkness. She places it near the water bowl and whispers a short invocation. The flame in the floating lamp flickers, and everyone grows still for a moment, listening to the silence that follows. The leader continues. He says a caravan route is being watched. He says a sacred object is moving between temples, guarded but vulnerable in marsh terrain. He says the marsh can take it, if it chooses. He does not explicitly say theft. He frames it as retrieval. That is a classic move. You do not steal what you claim was always yours. Historians still argue whether stories of rival cults and competing divine factions reflect actual religious pluralism and political contest across city-states, or whether later scribes exaggerated these tensions into dramatic narratives. In this hut, the tension feels real enough to shape decisions. People are planning movement, alliances, risks. That is not just storytelling. That is strategy. You notice a map scratched into clay on the floor. Not a detailed map like modern ones, but a diagram of waterways, reed clusters, a few key mounds, and markings that indicate safe paths. Someone has drawn small symbols that represent shrines. The leader points with a reed stem, outlining routes where boats can move unseen. He explains which channels are shallow, which are deep, which are watched by city patrols. A man at the edge of the circle speaks up. He says the city gods are powerful, and provoking them could invite disaster. He says storms do not care who is right. The leader answers calmly. He says disasters are already coming. He says if the divine world is in conflict, humans will suffer regardless. Better to choose a side that might protect you, rather than kneel and hope. The argument is not resolved with shouting. It is resolved with a ritual. They pass around a small cup of beer. Each person takes a sip and then touches the cup to the water bowl, letting a drop fall in. It is a communal oath, simple and intimate. The cup reaches you. You take a small sip. It is tangy and thick, more like bread in liquid form. You let a drop fall into the water. The flame flickers again. Your stomach tightens. Congratulations. You have participated in a marsh oath. Your resume is getting weird. Outside, the reeds rustle. A bird lifts suddenly, startled by something unseen. The leader says the host will gather at sunset. Boats will move quietly. Scouts will watch the sacred convoy. If the moment is right, they will act. You step out of the hut, and the marsh light is brighter, but it feels dimmer in your mind. The city's walls and temples are far away, and yet their influence reaches even here, provoking counter-movements. In this place of water and reeds, you see how divine war is not only fought in heavenly assemblies or temple halls, it is also fought in hidden channels, in whispered oaths, in the decision to call on older names and assemble a rebel host that moves like a shadow across the wetlands. You arrive at a place where the ground feels firm again. A raised mound overlooking a wide stretch of water that catches sunlight like hammered metal. The marsh has thinned into channels and mud flats, and the air smells less like decay and more like salt and wind. A small shrine sits on the mound, built of brick and plaster with a doorway that faces the open sky. No thick walls, no deep rooms. It feels exposed on purpose, as if the shrine is meant to speak upward without interruption. People gather quietly, not in the chaotic way of a market, but in the deliberate way of those attending a meeting they cannot afford to miss. Priests in plain robes, messengers with cords around their wrists, a few officials whose clothing is better woven, and, at the edge, watchers, the kind of people who lean against a wall and pretend they are just resting while actually memorizing everything. A stone platform stands near the shrine. On it, a shallow tray holds a layer of fine sand smoothed perfectly flat. Someone has drawn lines in the sand that resemble a star chart, not detailed like modern astronomy, but symbolic. A cluster of dots, a crescent, a line that might represent a path. The sight makes your mouth go dry because you realize what kind of meeting this is. It is not only human diplomacy. It is diplomacy performed for an audience above. The mainstream fact for this part is that Mesopotamian societies use oaths, treaties, and formal agreements, often sealed by witnesses and invoked divine powers as guarantors. Gods are not only worshipped, They are used as enforcement. If you swear by a god, you are telling the universe to punish you if you lie. It is a powerful way to keep humans honest, or at least afraid. A senior priest steps onto the platform and raises his hands. The crowd quiets. He begins reciting a list of names, each name paired with a title that feels like a job description. Lord of Wind, Keeper of Deep Water, Lady of Fierce Battle, Judge of Fates. The sequence is careful. You can tell the order matters. This is not free-form prayer. This is protocol. 2 attendants bring forward a clay tablet, still damp enough to smell like river mud. It is larger than most, rectangular and thick, made for permanence. The priest points to the sand tray, then to the sky. He speaks a phrase that suggests the agreement will be aligned with the stars, not literally written in starlight, but ritually anchored to the celestial order. So it cannot be easily challenged. The agreement is read aloud. It is not poetic. It is formal. It names obligations. It names boundaries. It names consequences. The language is careful, filled with repetitions that function like legal reinforcement. You feel your eyelids droop from the rhythm, then snap open when certain clauses land with cold clarity. There is a part that mentions silencing hostile words and binding rash decrees. It suggests that even divine speech can be dangerous enough to require restraint. Another clause describes the return or transfer of a sacred emblem under guarded conditions. A third clause establishes a new sequence of offerings for certain temples, implying a rebalanced hierarchy. Then comes the moment that makes everyone hold breath. The priest reads a clause about oaths that bind not only humans, but the great ones themselves. The crowd's reaction is subtle, but you can feel it, like a change in pressure. Humans can swear by gods. That is normal. But the idea of gods bound by an oath is an entirely different kind of audacity. The quirky tidbit slips in here, and it is deliciously human. Ancient treaties often include elaborate curse formulas, listing what will happen if the oath is broken. The list can get long, as if the writer is saying, if you break this, may your crops fail, your children cry, your roof leak, and your soup taste weird forever. The creativity of ancient curses is impressive. You almost respect the pettiness. Almost. A small animal, a lamb or goat, is brought forward. It is calm, unaware it is about to become symbolic. A priest touches its head and murmurs a blessing. The animal is then used in a ritual act that represents the consequences of oath-breaking. The details stay respectful and PG-13, but the symbolism is clear. This is the warning made physical. Everyone watches with solemn faces, because nobody wants to imagine the curse turning toward their own household. A second tablet is brought out, smaller, covered with compact writing. This one is not the treaty itself. It is a list of witnesses and ritual steps. The priest reads names of cities, temples, and officials. Then he reads a list of divine witnesses. The list is shorter than the earlier recitation, and that difference matters. Not everyone is invited to witness. Some names are absent. You feel the political weight of omission. A messenger steps forward and asks a question that sounds innocent. He asks whether the oath allows for interpretation if circumstances change. The priest's eyes narrow. He knows what this is. It is an attempt to carve out a loophole. The priest answers with a phrase that is both reassuring and terrifying. He says the words "stand," but the wise know how to walk between signs. The crowd murmurs softly. That is the legal grey zone, acknowledged openly. The treaty is firm, but interpretation is always possible for those with power and cleverness. In other words, everyone is already planning how to bend it. Historians still argue whether these mythic and ritual treaty motifs reflect real intercity diplomacy projected onto the gods, or whether they represent a priestly attempt to manage contradictions in theology by framing them as negotiated settlements. Either way, you can feel the function. A treaty is a way to stop chaos, at least temporarily, by making it illegal. The final ritual step involves the sand tray. The priest takes a small rod and redraws part of the star pattern, smoothing one line and deepening another. He speaks a short phrase that suggests a path is being corrected. The crowd watches like the sand is a living instrument. Then the priest lifts the tray and tips the sand into the water below, letting the pattern dissolve. It is symbolic and oddly calming. The agreement is made, and now it is released into the world. A woman in the crowd whispers that dissolving the pattern prevents anyone from copying it for hostile magic. Another man whispers that it also prevents anyone from proving what the pattern was. Both explanations feel plausible. Secrecy is useful for safety and for control. The treaty tablet is sealed with multiple cylinder seals. Each seal impression is distinct, like a chorus of signatures. The clay is still soft enough to take the images, and you watch the seals roll: gods, animals, stars, kings, kneeling figures. Every impression is a claim. Every impression says, "I was here. I agree. I will remember." As the crowd disperses, you notice a small group lingering, speaking in low tones. Their faces are not relieved. Their faces are calculating. That is when you understand the treaty is not an ending. It is a pause, a reshuffling, a way to buy time. It is a bandage on a wound that still aches. A gust of wind sweeps across the water and lifts dust from the mound. The shrine's doorway frames a slice of sky, bright and indifferent. You hear someone murmur that the wind sounds calmer. Another person replies that calm wind can be the most suspicious kind, because it means something is holding its breath. You walk away from the mound with the taste of clay dust on your tongue and the heavy sense of promises spoken under open sky. A treaty has been made with stars as witnesses, with gods invoked as enforcers, with loopholes already sniffed out like dogs finding hidden food. And the world feels quieter, not because conflict is gone, but because conflict has been folded into legal language, sealed into clay, and entrusted to the fragile hope that words can hold back a storm. You walk toward a place nobody points to directly. It is not marked on any public diagram. It is not a destination people recommend with enthusiasm. You learn about it the way you learn about a family scandal, through pauses and side glances and phrases like "over there," paired with a quick change of subject. Even the road seems reluctant, winding through low fields and broken irrigation channels, crossing patches of ground where salt crusts the soil like frost that never melts. The sky is pale, washed out, and the wind feels thin. The birds are quieter here. The landscape has an awkward emptiness, as if the land itself is trying not to remember what happened. You smell dry grass, dust, and something faintly bitter that might be old smoke or just your imagination reaching for drama. The truth is, ruins do not need special effects. Their silence is enough. Ahead, low mounds rise like sleeping animals. Broken bricks poke through the earth. A collapsed wall leans at an angle that makes your shoulders tense, as if it might finally give up and fall the rest of the way while you watch. Scattered pottery shards crunch underfoot, and you immediately do that guilty little shuffle where you try to step on nothing, even though everything is already broken. Archaeology has trained you, even in a dream. A shepherd stands at the edge of the ruins with a small flock. He watches his animals more than he watches you, but when you come close, he raises a hand, not a greeting, a warning. He tells you not to linger. He says the place is unlucky. He says people who sleep here wake with bad dreams and dry mouths. He says the wind carries voices at night. You ask why the place is avoided. He spits to the side, then shrugs, like he is trying not to take responsibility for his own story. He says there was a conflict here that nobody commemorates, no festival, no heroic songs, no carved victory inscriptions, only avoidance, only silence. That kind of silence is heavier than celebration. The mainstream fact for this part is that ancient Mesopotamian cities often fought each other, and conflicts could lead to destruction, abandonment, or shifting populations. Yet the written record is selective. Not every loss is advertised. Not every disaster becomes a public narrative. Sometimes rulers erase what makes them look weak, and sometimes, later, generations simply do not want to remember. You step into the ruins. The ground is uneven, and the air seems to change, cooler in pockets where walls still cast shadow. You find a fragment of a brick with a faint impression of writing, not enough to read, but enough to recognize the purposeful wedge marks. You pick it up carefully, then set it back, because you are not about to steal from a cursed ruin. Also, the last thing you need is a divine customer service complaint filed against you. Near the center of the site is a platform, partially intact, with a shallow depression like an altar base. Around it, the soil is darker, and there are bits of charred wood mixed into the dust. The shepherd's warning echoes in your head. Unlucky, bad dreams, voices. You do not believe in curses the way he does, but you believe in the psychology of places. Some locations carry an atmosphere because humans carry stories. A woman approaches from the far side, older, with a bundle of herbs in her hand. She looks like someone who's come here for a reason, not by accident. She sees you and pauses, then nods slowly. She says she gathers bitter plants here because they grow strong in ruined ground. She says bitterness is useful. It drives out sickness. It wakes the body. You ask her what happened here. She does not answer directly. Instead, she tells you a story about a shrine that once stood on this platform. A shrine dedicated to a lesser-known divine figure, not one of the highest authorities, but important to the local people. She says the shrine was accused of harboring wrong words. She says priests from a larger temple came and demanded the shrine's emblem, claiming the divine order required it. The local priests refused. She says a fight followed, not only among humans, but in the sky. She points to the horizon and says a storm came that day, sudden and violent. Wind and dust, a darkness at midday. People ran and couldn't see their own hands. She says afterward, the shrine was burned, the emblem gone, and the people scattered. No one built it back. The quirky tidbit for this part creeps in through her herb bundle. In Mesopotamian magical practice, plants, especially bitter ones, are used in cleansing rituals and protective charms. People might sprinkle herbal mixtures, wash with infused water, or burn certain plants to ward off harmful influences. If this place is thought to carry dangerous residue, then coming here to gather bitterness is not just medicine. It is spiritual housekeeping. As you walk deeper, you notice something odd. There are no obvious offerings, no little piles of stones, no bowls left by the curious. It is as if everyone agreed, collectively, not to feed the memory. That feels deliberate. People often leave offerings at ruins if they fear spirits. The absence suggests either confidence or a stronger fear. A fear that attention itself is dangerous. You find a section of wall where plaster still clings. Someone scratched into it long ago. Not formal cuneiform, but a crude mark, a symbol. It resembles a mouth crossed by a line. You recognize it as a warning sign, a ritual shorthand for silence. Do not speak. Do not name. Do not call attention. Historians still argue whether such forgotten sites are evidence of intentional memory suppression, perhaps tied to political or religious restructuring, or whether they simply reflect the normal churn of settlement patterns where some places are abandoned and later avoided for practical reasons like poor water access. The symbolism here, the scratched sign, the stories of wrong words, suggest something more than simple economics. You climb the platform carefully, feeling the grit under your sandals. From the top, you can see the surrounding land, canals like scars, fields like faded cloth. It is easy to imagine a crowd here, a ceremony, a confrontation. It is also easy to imagine a sudden decision made by powerful outsiders. Remove the emblem, silence the shrine, fold the local god into a larger hierarchy or erase it. A strange stillness settles. The wind pauses. You hear your own breathing. For a moment, you feel the urge to whisper, to test if voices really carry here. Then you stop yourself, not because you fully believe in the curse, but because you respect the human fear that shaped this place. Silence is a ritual, too. The herb woman kneels and places a few leaves in the depression on the platform. Not an offering, she insists, but a marker. She says bitterness reminds the ground to stay quiet. Then she stands, dusts her hands, and tells you to leave before the sun dips. She says twilight makes the place louder. You walk out of the ruin and glance back once. The mounds sit under the pale sky, unimpressed by your attention. The shepherd's flock moves along the edge, hooves tapping softly, as if even the animals know not to linger. As you return to the road, you carry a new understanding that some battles are not celebrated because celebration would keep them alive. When a conflict reshapes which gods are permitted to stand tall, the losers do not get songs. They get silence. They get ruins that people avoid. They get a place where even the wind seems to have learned to hush its voice. You return toward inhabited roads where the air grows thicker with smoke, cooking smells, and the low hum of daily life. The shift is almost shocking. One moment you're among broken bricks and silence, And now you are in a living world where someone is arguing loudly about the price of onions, as if the universe is not trembling. This is how humans survive. You keep bargaining. You keep baking bread. You keep pretending tomorrow is normal until it proves otherwise. A town sits ahead, smaller than a great city, but busy enough to have a market square and a modest temple. The temple is not a towering monument. It is practical. A brick courtyard, a small altar, a storage room, a place for priests to manage offerings. People come in and out with baskets and jars. Their faces look tired, not in the sleepy bedtime way, but in the worry way. You drift into the market and notice a pattern. Offerings are smaller. Where you expect full baskets, you see modest handfuls. A woman places a few dates on a shrine ledge and then hesitates, as if she wants to add more but cannot. A man pours a small amount of beer and keeps the rest for his family. Nobody looks proud about it. They look apologetic. The mainstream fact for this part is that offerings and rituals in Mesopotamian life are part of maintaining relationships with deities, and economic pressures can affect what people can give. Temples also rely on resources and labor. When the world feels unstable, people often increase religious activity, but they might not have the means to do it lavishly. A priest stands near the temple entrance, blessing people as they pass. His voice is gentle, but his eyes look strained. He repeats a phrase about steady hearts and quiet mouths. That second part catches your attention. Quiet mouths. It shows up again and again, like a new mantra spreading through the population. You step closer and listen. A man asks the priest whether the gods are angry. The priest replies that the gods are distant, not angry. That is a subtle difference. Anger implies engagement. Distance implies withdrawal. The man's face falls, because you can appease anger with gifts and rituals. But how do you appease silence? In the market, a group of women trade news. One says her child had a nightmare of a great wind pushing doors shut. Another says her husband heard a priest mention that certain hymns are no longer sung. Another says the temple has stopped performing a particular rite at night, the one that usually invites divine presence to sit among the people. They speak softly, glancing around, because rumor about gods is not safe gossip. A young boy runs through the crowd waving a cheap clay rattle. It makes a dry clacking sound. He bumps into a jar, and it wobbles. His mother grabs him and hisses at him. Her tone is sharp with fear. She is not only worried about the jar breaking. She is worried about attracting attention from forces that feel touchy and unpredictable. The boy pouts. The gods may be distant, but parental wrath is immediate and local. The quirky tidbit slips in through the priest's daily work. Priests and ritual specialists in Mesopotamia often use incantations that treat illness, bad dreams, and misfortune, as if they are entities that can be addressed, expelled, or redirected. The words used can sound like legal proceedings, commanding a problem to leave when people report more nightmares, more anxiety, more strange feelings. It can lead to a rise in small protective rituals, not grand sacrifices, but little actions, a knot tied, a pinch of salt, a whispered formula. You see it everywhere. A man ties a red thread around his wrist. A woman hangs a small charm near her doorway. A merchant rubs oil on the corner of his stall and mutters a phrase that sounds like, Stay steady. Everyone is doing tiny repairs on their sense of safety. You head into the temple courtyard. The altar is clean, but the air feels different from what you expect. Less incense, less chanting, more quiet. A junior priest sweeps the ground with careful strokes, and each stroke looks like it is meant to calm the space. You ask him why it is so quiet. He looks at you, then downward, and answers in a voice barely above breath. He says the temple has been instructed to reduce certain invocations. He says inviting the Great Ones too directly can pull their contention into the town. He says it is safer to keep prayers general, respectful, and short. You almost laugh at the irony. The gods are powerful, but also apparently can be annoyed by a strongly worded invitation. Historians still argue whether shifts in ritual practice reflected actual changes in theological belief, such as increasing emphasis on divine transcendence, or whether they were pragmatic responses to political turmoil and social stress. In this town, the change looks pragmatic. People are afraid of provoking forces they do not understand, so they simplify, they whisper, they keep it safe. The town's governor arrives, accompanied by 2 guards. His robe is well made, but his shoulders sag. He speaks with the head priest privately near the storage room. You catch a few words. Shortfall, rations, temple workers, cannot maintain. The governor rubs his forehead like he has a headache carved into his skull. The head priest nods, then opens a ledger tablet and points to a column. The governor's face tightens. You recognize the look. It is the look of someone realizing the math does not work. Offerings are down. Grain stores are strained. Labor obligations are harder to fulfill because people are anxious and resources are diverted. The governor then asks about omens. He asks whether the gods are settled. The priest hesitates, then says the gods are quiet. Again, quiet, not settled. The governor exhales through his nose and murmurs something that sounds like a bitter joke. He says he would prefer anger, because at least anger would mean the gods are paying attention. He immediately regrets the joke, glances upward, and adds a hurried, respectful phrase. That is your second sleepy laugh of the night. Even leaders panic apologize to the sky. A bell-like sound rings from a small instrument near the altar. Not loud, just enough to mark the hour for a routine rite. A few worshippers gather. The priest performs a brief offering, then recites a prayer that avoids specific names. He says the great ones and the lords and the ladies, but he does not single out the highest authority. It feels like writing "Dear valued customer" when you are not sure who is reading your message. When the rite ends, people linger, hoping for a sign, a breeze, a flicker, a feeling. Nothing obvious comes. They look disappointed, but also relieved. A sign could mean engagement, but it could also mean danger. As evening approaches, the market winds down. People carry goods home. The town grows quieter. Lamps appear in doorways. Families gather, speaking softly. You sense a collective attempt to keep the night calm, to keep the invisible world from noticing them too sharply. You walk past a doorway where an older man tells a child a story. He does not describe gods as loud warriors or dramatic heroes. He describes them as far-away rulers who once walked close, but now prefer distance. The child asks why. The man says the world is noisy, and the gods prefer quiet. It is a comforting answer, but you can hear the worry under it. Quiet can be safety. Quiet can also be abandonment. And as the first stars appear, you feel the town's new rhythm. Less triumphant ritual, more cautious devotion, less confident talk about divine protection, more small charms and whispered prayers. The gods are not gone, but the relationship has changed into something like a formal distance, and you can taste the human response in the air, a blend of resignation, adaptation, and the stubborn, sleepy hope that if everyone stays polite and quiet, the sky will remain stable through the night. You enter a city gate at mid-morning and feel the difference immediately. The guards are sharper. The wall is better maintained. The street inside is swept clean in a way that looks less like pride and more like control. Banners hang near the main avenue, their cloth stiff in the breeze. People walk with purpose, and when they pause, they do so near doorways, not in the open. It is the body language of a place that expects inspection. A herald stands on a low platform near the market and reads an announcement to a gathered crowd. His voice is practiced, steady, and just loud enough to carry. He speaks of order. He speaks of justice. He speaks of a ruler chosen by the great ones to hold the land steady. The crowd listens respectfully. Some faces look hopeful. Some look blank. The way people look when they have learned to nod at speeches to avoid trouble. The mainstream fact for this part is that Mesopotamian kings often claim divine legitimacy, presenting themselves as chosen by, beloved by, or commissioned by gods. Royal inscriptions and public proclamations link human rule to cosmic order. If the gods command reality, then the king is the manager of that command on earth. You follow the crowd toward a temple courtyard that has been decorated for a public rite. A platform is set up. A basin of water gleams. An altar smokes with incense. Priests stand in a line, and at their center is a man in a robe, far finer than the rest, embroidered at the edges with patterns that catch the light. The king. He does not stride like a warrior. He moves like someone who has practiced being watched. His steps are measured. His expression is calm. But his eyes scan the crowd, not in paranoia, in evaluation. He's reading people the way a scribe reads a tablet, looking for signs. A priest recites a blessing, and then the king performs a gesture that makes the crowd murmur softly. He takes a small object from a cloth bundle and holds it up for everyone to see. It is not a weapon, not a crown. It is a seal stone or emblem, small enough to fit in a palm, but carved with a symbol that marks authority. The gesture is clear. Authority is tangible. It can be held. It can be displayed. It can be claimed. You listen to the words that follow. The priest says the emblem has been entrusted to the king to carry the thunder. That phrase sticks in your mind, carry the thunder. It suggests the king is inheriting a function that once belonged more directly to the divine realm. The crowd reacts with a mix of awe and relief. Humans like the idea of someone local holding the steering wheel, even if the steering wheel is mostly ceremonial. The quirky tidbit slips in with a twist of humor. In some Mesopotamian traditions, there are rituals involving substitutes, where someone or something temporarily takes on the role of a target for misfortune, then is removed to protect the real person. It is a way to trick fate. So when you see a king ceremonially receiving an emblem, you wonder if part of the function is similar. If divine conflict sends danger toward rulers, maybe the ritual creates layers, buffers, a symbolic shield. Politics with magical insurance. After the public rite, the crowd disperses, but you follow the flow of officials toward a palace district. The palace is less sacred-smelling and more practical. There are storerooms, courtyards, guards, administrators carrying tablets. A scribe sits near a doorway, recording who enters and leaves. He looks bored, which is exactly what you want in security. Bored means nothing is on fire. Inside a hall, the king meets with advisors. You are not invited, obviously, but you hover at the edge as if you are part of the furniture. It works because nobody expects furniture to talk. The advisors present reports, grain allocations, patrol schedules, temple communications. Each report has a religious angle, a festival date, an omen reading, a ritual request. The king listens, then issues decisions that sound like sacred management. One advisor suggests increasing offerings to certain temples to show alignment with the highest authority. Another suggests reducing public invocations to avoid inflaming tension among divine factions. The king nods, then says something that shifts the atmosphere. He says the land needs one voice. It is a political statement dressed as theology. One voice means fewer rival cults, fewer competing claims, fewer cities acting independently. One voice means centralization. The king is using the language of cosmic order to justify human consolidation. Historians still argue whether the rise of stronger kingship in Mesopotamia is primarily driven by military and economic factors, or whether theological developments and temple institutions play an equally central role in shaping political authority. Watching this king speak, you feel the braid of factors, grain, guards, gods, all tied together into one rope. A scribe brings in a tablet with a draft proclamation. The king reads it, then corrects a phrase with his finger. He changes a verb from serve to represent. That single change is huge. Serve implies humility. Represent implies embodiment. The king is not just a servant of the gods. He is their visible proxy. Another proclamation is prepared for the market. It announces new measures for temple oversight. Certain rites must be approved. Certain priests must report to the palace. Certain offerings must be recorded. This is bureaucracy expanding like a tide. You walk out of the palace district and return to the streets. People are reacting already. A merchant complains quietly that the palace now demands extra fees framed as sacred contributions. A priest whispers to another priest that the king is trying to control which hymns are sung. A soldier says it is good because at least someone is keeping things stable. A mother says she doesn't care who is in charge as long as the water keeps flowing and her children keep eating. In a small side alley, you see a street shrine that has been modified. A symbol that once stood prominently has been moved lower, partially covered by a new plaque bearing the king's seal impression. It is subtle, not destruction. Reordering. The king's mark sits above the older sign, like a new layer of paint on an old wall. A craftsman nearby mutters that even thunder has a tax now. You almost laugh, then bite it back, because the craftsman is not joking. Still, it is your third small smile of the section. Humans will always find a way to complain about taxes, even when taxes are wrapped in divine vocabulary. As the sun lowers, a small procession moves through the main avenue. Soldiers, priests, and officials. At the center, a standard is carried upright, and beside it, a tablet in a protective box. The crowd bows their heads. The king is not present, but his authority is. The procession stops at a boundary marker and performs a short rite that names the land as held by the king's commission. You stand among the people and feel the shift. The gods haven't vanished, but human rule is swelling into the space that divine presence used to occupy more directly. The king's proclamations, seals, and standards are becoming the practical interface between heaven and earth. And as the procession moves on, you understand that when divine authority becomes quieter, kings do not simply fill the silence with their own words. They claim the silence as permission. They take the thunder, hold it in their hands, stamp it into clay, and tell the world, gently but firmly, that order now has a human face. You slip into a room that smells like dust, old reeds, and quiet arguments. It is not a temple hall and not a palace office. It feels like a crossroads where people who love texts gather to fight politely. Shelves line the walls, packed with tablets in baskets. A low table sits at the center with damp clay, styluses, and several tablets laid out like evidence in a trial. Two scribes sit opposite each other, both with the rigid posture of men who have spent their lives learning to be precise and are now furious that precision is impossible. A third person, older, acts as mediator. He wears a robe with minimal decoration and has the tired calm of someone who has watched many debates boil and then cool. He gestures for you to sit quietly in the corner. You do, because you can feel the energy in the room, and you do not want to be the person who interrupts a scholar mid-argument. Interrupting scholars is how curses happen, not magical curses, academic curses. Worse. On the table, one tablet is intact, smooth, with clean wedge marks. Another tablet is broken, its edges jagged, missing a chunk like a bite. A third is a fresh copy in progress. The scribes point to lines, compare sign shapes, and mutter about variants. One insists a sign is read one way. The other insists it is read another. The mediator listens, nods, and occasionally asks a question that forces them to slow down and explain, rather than just glare. The mainstream fact here is that cuneiform texts survive in many copies and fragments, and scribes sometimes reproduce older compositions with variations, breakage, regional scribal traditions. And intentional editing can produce differing versions of the same myth or ritual line. Reconstructing meaning often involves comparing fragments and deciding what is most plausible. One scribe, younger and intense, argues that the text clearly describes a divine defeat, using a verb that implies being forced down. He traces the sign with his finger and says the angle of the wedge indicates this reading. The older scribe snorts and says the sign could instead indicate withdrawal, a more dignified action. He points out the context, arguing that a god would not be described as crushed in official tradition. He says it must be a metaphor or a scribal error. The younger scribe says it is not an error. He says the line appears in multiple fragments, He says suppressing the reading is political. The older scribe says insisting on the harsh reading is reckless and invites trouble. Their voices rise, then drop when the mediator raises a hand. Calm, he says. Calm, like he's trying to keep the whole room from catching fire. A fourth person enters, carrying a small basket. He sets it down and reveals tablets wrapped in cloth. Everyone stiffens. New evidence. The basket is opened, and a tablet emerges with a seal impression from a known temple. The writing is cramped, the lines tight. The mediator reads silently, then lets out a slow breath. He says the new tablet includes a line that matches the contested passage, but with an extra phrase that clarifies intent. The phrase is ambiguous in its own way, because of course it is. The gods never deliver clean paperwork. The younger scribe claims victory and smirks. The older scribe rolls his eyes and says the extra phrase could be a later addition. The mediator says both possibilities are plausible. Then the conversation shifts to something darker. The older scribe mentions forgeries, not in the sense of modern scams, but in the sense that ambitious people sometimes create texts that support their claims. A temple might discover an ancient hymn that conveniently elevates its patron deity. A ruler might commission an inscription that implies divine approval. A scribe might copy a text and subtly adjust a title to favor a particular hierarchy. The ink is clay, but the manipulation is timeless. The quirky tidbit here is that scribes sometimes leave little marks or colophons, notes at the end of tablets, identifying themselves, their school, or warning against unauthorized copying. Some even include little prideful lines about how accurate they were. It is the ancient version of signing your work and saying, if you find mistakes, blame someone else. In a world where texts are power, scribal identity matters. A debate begins about a missing section. The broken tablet has a gap, right where the narrative would explain a crucial moment. The younger scribe proposes an arrangement of lines based on parallel texts. The older scribe proposes a different arrangement based on stylistic rhythm. They argue about the length of a line, the expected pattern of repetition, and whether a particular divine name would appear in that position. Historians still argue whether certain mythic compositions reflect a single original version, or whether they were always fluid, evolving through oral performance and scribal adaptation. The room you sit in feels like the debate turned into flesh. These men are not just copying, they are negotiating what the past is allowed to say. The mediator asks a question that makes the room go quiet. He asks what happens if the harsh reading is correct. What happens if the text truly claims a divine authority was overturned? The younger scribe says, it explains the shifting rituals and the rise of new political claims. The older scribe says it would undermine public faith and could be seen as insulting to powerful temples. The mediator nods slowly and says, so the stakes are not only scholarly. A messenger arrives with a small clay tag, like a receipt. He hands it to the mediator and leaves. The mediator reads it and frowns. He says a palace official has requested copies of specific texts about divine authority, including contested lines. Both scribes go stiff. The younger one looks excited. The older one looks worried. The mediator says the request includes an instruction. The copies must match the palace-approved wording. The older scribe nods as if he expected this. The younger scribe looks frustrated. He mutters that this is how truth becomes policy. They begin copying anyway, because refusal is dangerous. You watch their hands move. The younger scribe presses wedges with controlled force. The older scribe presses with practiced softness. Their styles differ, but both aim for clarity. Then something surprising happens. The younger scribe, who argued for the harsh reading, chooses the palace-approved softer wording in the official copy. He does it without comment, without protest. You realize his argument in the room is not the same as what he can safely write for officials. He keeps the harsh reading in his mind and in private notes. But he serves the required version publicly. The older scribe sees this and relaxes slightly. The mediator watches without reaction, because he has seen this dance before. Outside the room, you hear the sound of the city. A cartwheel creaks. A vendor calls out. A child laughs. Life goes on while versions of the past are being selected, like ingredients in a recipe. You step out into the light and feel a strange tiredness. Not the sleepy kind, but the mental fatigue of realizing history is not only what happened, it is what gets copied, what gets preserved, what gets approved, what gets quietly set aside. In a world where a single wedge can change meaning, the war that ended the gods can be fought again on a tabletop, in argument, in compromise, in the silent choice to write one word instead of another. You walk into a chamber where the air feels heavier, like the walls are built from decisions rather than bricks. The space belongs to no single temple and no single palace. It is a shared room, used when people with power need to agree on what they will call true. Lamps sit in niches. A bowl of water rests on a low altar. There is no grand idol in the center, only symbols on walls, carved and painted, showing stars, reeds, and the horned crowns that mark divinity. The room is deliberately neutral, like a courtroom that wants to pretend it has no bias. 3 figures wait inside. A high priest from a major temple, his robe clean and expensive. A palace administrator, carrying a tablet case, his face set in professional caution. And a ritual specialist, older, with hands stained by incense and plant mixtures, the kind of person who deals with nightmares and omens for a living. They look at each other like chess pieces arranged by someone else. You are allowed to stand near the wall, silent. Your presence is either tolerated because you seem harmless, or because nobody can admit they do not recognize you. Again, confidence is a passport. You keep your expression calm, like you belong, even though your brain is screaming. Do not cough, do not sneeze, do not become an event. The high priest begins with a statement that is almost a sigh. He says the old stories are causing confusion. He says people ask why gods feel distant. He says rituals are changing faster than tradition can explain. He says the divine order must be clarified, because uncertainty breeds fear. The palace administrator responds with a different concern. He says the land needs stable narratives. He says rebellion grows when people believe the heavens are divided. He says any language that suggests divine defeat should be controlled. His tone is not sacrilegious. It is managerial. He treats belief like infrastructure. Roads, canals, gods, all need maintenance. The ritual specialist leans forward and says, People are reporting dreams of closed gates and muffled voices. He says fear is spreading in quiet ways. He says you can command a public story, but you cannot command a dream. His words land like cold water on a hot forehead. The mainstream fact for this part is that Mesopotamian religion is not a fixed book with one official doctrine. It is a complex system of local traditions, temple politics, and evolving myths. Different cities emphasize different deities, and theological ideas shift over time, especially as political power shifts. What people call the gods is often a layered compromise. The high priest gestures to a tablet laid on the table. He says it contains a composition that describes a great conflict among the divine, ending with a new boundary between heaven and earth. He says the conflict can be interpreted in 3 ways. He raises one finger. First, he says, the gods may have withdrawn by choice, not defeated, not killed, but deliberately stepping back to preserve order. He says the divine realm becomes more distant to prevent human chaos and divine contention from mixing. It is a comforting interpretation. Like parents leaving the room so siblings stop fighting. He raises a second finger. Second, he says, the gods may have relocated. He uses a phrase that implies shifting their seat, moving their council to a place less accessible. He suggests the great temple centers become the only proper channels, and lesser shrines lose direct access. This interpretation supports temple authority. Convenient. Of course. He raises a third finger. Third, he says, the conflict may be rewritten by humans. He does not phrase it as manipulation. He phrases it as harmonization. He says scribes and priests select versions that preserve dignity and hierarchy, smoothing contradictions. The gods do not change. The story changes. The palace administrator nods at the third option, like it tastes delicious. The ritual specialist looks skeptical. He says, if it is only rewriting, why do people feel the change in their bodies? Why do omens shift? Why do dreams repeat the same closed gate imagery? The quirky tidbit for this part arrives in the ritual specialist's bundle. He sets a small object on the table, a tiny clay model of a door with a peg that can swing it open and shut. It is a ritual toy, almost cute, except it is used in a rite to close harmful influences out of a home. He says people have been requesting this door charm more than usual. He says households hang them near entrances, symbolic doors to guard real doors. It is adorable and ominous at the same time, like a stuffed animal that also functions as security equipment. The debate sharpens. The palace administrator says stories of divine war must be reframed as a test that ended in renewed order. He suggests emphasizing the treaty language, the oaths, the re-established hierarchy. He wants a narrative of stability. The high priest agrees in principle, but insists on preserving the honor of the highest authority. He wants wording that implies the outcome was decided by rightful command, not messy conflict. He suggests replacing verbs that imply defeat with verbs that imply judgment. The ritual specialist insists something real happened. He says the rites for direct divine presence have become less effective. He says protective rituals are increasing because people feel exposed. He says the gods might still be present, but their closeness has changed in a way that cannot be explained away by clever wording. Historians still argue whether the perceived distance of gods in later traditions reflects actual theological evolution toward more transcendent concepts of divinity, or whether it is a response to political centralization and social trauma that made direct divine intimacy feel dangerous or unreliable. The chamber you stand in holds all those possibilities like smoke, swirling but never settling. The high priest proposes a solution. He suggests issuing a new set of standardized hymns that emphasize divine unity and lawful order. He suggests certain older lines be reserved for restricted recitation, only by senior priests, only in controlled contexts. He calls it protection. The palace administrator calls it governance. The ritual specialist calls it denial. But he says it softly. Then the palace administrator adds a chilling point. He says if people believe gods can lose, they might believe kings can lose too. The logic is blunt. If heaven is unstable, earth is unstable. So the story must present heaven as stable, even if stability is achieved by silence. The ritual specialist responds with a tired kind of courage. He says fear cannot be commanded away. He says people need a way to process the idea that sacred order can change. He suggests allowing a controlled story of conflict, but framing it as a necessary transformation, like a painful healing. He suggests teaching people protective rites that are honest about uncertainty. The high priest looks thoughtful. He says a story that admits conflict could also reinforce the need for proper ritual channels. He sees opportunity. The palace administrator sees risk. The ritual specialist sees reality. They settle on a compromise. The public narrative will speak of a divine reckoning that leads to a new separation between spheres. The language will avoid outright defeat. It will emphasize lawful decree and restored order. But private texts will preserve sharper versions for elite circles, so those with power can still understand the messy mechanics. You watch them decide this like watching someone edit the sky. Their styluses scratch on clay. Words are chosen, titles adjusted. A single sign is replaced with another. The palace administrator smiles faintly, satisfied. The high priest relaxes, relieved. The ritual specialist looks resigned, as if he knows people will still dream of closed gates no matter what hymns are sung. As you leave the chamber, you pass a wall carving of a horned crown above a doorway symbol. The carving is beautiful and calm. It suggests certainty. Yet you can feel the truth underneath. The war did not end with a clean victory. It ended with a new arrangement of distance, a new management of access, and a new story designed to make the world livable. And you carry the eerie realization that sometimes the end of the gods is not death, not exile, not disappearance. Sometimes it is a redefinition, a careful political decision about how close the divine is allowed to feel, and how much of the conflict is permitted to remain in human memory. You walk with a lantern that is not really needed, because dawn is already softening the edges of the world. But you carry it anyway, because it makes you feel like you have a job. The light swings gently in your hand, and the flame inside it wobbles with each step, like it is half asleep too. The street is quiet in that early way, where even the dogs seem to respect the hour. The building ahead is plain from the outside, almost anonymous, the kind of place you could pass without noticing if you did not know what it holds. Inside, though, the air smells like clay and reeds and the slow patience of people who preserve things. A guard lets you in with a nod, and you enter the archive room where lamps still burn low. The light is warm and steady, and the stacks of tablets look like a landscape of small brown moons. A senior scribe sits alone at the low table, shoulders slightly hunched, as if carrying weight that is not physical. He has a tablet in front of him and a stylus resting beside it. He does not start speaking immediately. He studies the clay, then studies you, then finally exhales, as if deciding you're real enough to address. He says there is one tablet that is not read publicly. It is not forbidden in the dramatic sense. It is forbidden in the quiet sense. The way certain family stories are forbidden because everyone agreed they cause too much pain. He lifts the tablet carefully, showing you its seal impressions, multiple seals, many witnesses. Then he turns it so the writing catches the light. The mainstream fact for this final part is that many Mesopotamian compositions survive in fragmentary form, and some texts were copied and curated within temple and palace contexts, shaping what was emphasized and what was restricted. Archives are not neutral storage. They are choices made solid. The scribe begins translating in a voice that is steady but soft, like he knows this is a bedtime story and also a dangerous confession. The tablet describes a final act that follows divine contention. It is not a battle scene with clashing weapons. It is an administrative act, almost boring in form, which makes it more chilling. It describes the sealing of access. The tablet frames it as a necessary decision by the Great Ones to prevent their disputes from tearing the world's fabric. It says the boundary between divine and human must be strengthened. It says certain gates of approach, ritual gateways, are to be closed, except under strict conditions. It says some names are to be spoken only by specific mouths. It says the divine assembly will no longer appear in the same immediate way to ordinary people. The language is calm. The consequence is huge. You feel a strange sadness in it, like a friend moving away and promising to write, even though everyone knows the letters will be rare. The scribe pauses and taps a line with his stylus. He says the text uses a phrase that can be read in two ways. It could mean the gods go quiet. It could mean the gods become hidden. He says both readings have supporters. He says the ambiguity might be intentional. Historians still argue whether such language reflects a theological move toward divine transcendence, where gods become more remote and less directly accessible, or whether it reflects a socio-political restructuring, where temples and kings tighten control of religious access to stabilize society. The tablet can carry both meanings at once, and that is part of its power. The quirky tidbit arrives in the scribe's next action. He reaches under the table and pulls out a small clay tag, a label that would normally tie to a basket or jar. On it is a simple mark, not a full text, a symbol for restricted. He says archives sometimes use such tags to indicate texts that should not be recited casually. It is the ancient version of a parental control setting, except it is applied to cosmic secrets. You almost smile, but the room is too quiet for jokes to feel safe. So your smile stays small. The scribe continues. The tablet mentions a last lantern used in a rite where a lamp is extinguished to symbolize withdrawal of presence, not darkness forever, but a shift in how light is given. The rite is performed at a boundary point, a doorway, a canal junction, a temple threshold. Depending on the city, the lamp is lit, prayers are spoken. Then the flame is covered and allowed to die without a gust. No dramatic snuffing, a gentle fade. You can almost hear the hush as people watch a flame vanish, knowing it represents a change that cannot be undone. The scribe explains that this tablet is copied with extreme care because it influences how priests behave. If the gods are distant by decree, then priests must emphasize correct procedure and controlled access. If the gods are hidden for safety, then fear becomes part of devotion. If the gods are quiet because of conflict, then silence becomes sacred. He sets the tablet down and looks at you as if asking what you think. You do not speak, because sometimes the most respectful answer is stillness. Also, you do not want to accidentally trigger a ritual clause by saying the wrong word in the wrong room. Your life is exciting enough. He stands and walks to a shelf. He pulls out a different tablet, smaller, with a list of hymns. He points to several that have been marked with a subtle sign. These hymns are revised versions, softened, emphasizing unity and order. He says the public story is now built from these. The sharper versions remain in the back, for senior eyes only. He does not sound angry. He sounds tired. Outside, the dawn brightens. The light that enters the archive is pale and cool, and it mixes with the warm lamp glow in a way that feels symbolic. Two lights, one fading, one rising. You feel the metaphor without trying. The scribe walks you to the doorway. He tells you something simple that lands hard. He says people think gods disappear when belief fades. He says in this case, belief did not fade. Access changed. The gods did not end in fire. They ended in policy. You step outside. The city is waking. Someone is sweeping a doorstep. A child is yawning. A pot is clinking as a woman prepares morning food. Life is continuing because life always continues. Yet the sky above feels different, not because it looks different, but because your mind now holds a different relationship to it. You look at the blue and feel the idea of a closed gate somewhere unseen, a gate that keeps divinity at a careful distance. You walk toward the edge of the city where the road meets fields. The air is cooler, and birds begin to sing more confidently. Your lantern is still in your hand, but now the sun is bright enough that the lantern's flame is pointless. You pause and look at it. The flame is small, steady, harmless. It feels like a last remnant of an older intimacy. You set the lantern down and cover it gently, letting the flame die slowly, without drama. The smoke curls upward in a thin line and disappears into morning air. It is oddly peaceful. Now the pacing slows. Your footsteps become softer. The world's sounds become rounder and less sharp. The fields stretch out, calm and golden. The canals reflect the sky like long mirrors. You breathe in, and your chest loosens. Whatever storms argued above, whatever policies sealed gates, the earth beneath your feet is still here, steady enough to hold you. You let your thoughts drift like a boat on quiet water. Names, seals, tablets, and whispered oaths all fade into the background hum of existence. The sun warms your face. The breeze feels gentle. Your eyelids grow heavy in the nicest way. the way they do when you're safe and the day is kind. You do not need to solve everything tonight. You do not need to hold the whole divine argument in your mind. You can let it rest, like clay setting, like water smoothing a rough stone. The world is allowed to be mysterious without being threatening. The sky can be vast without demanding answers. You keep walking until the city sounds fall away and only the soft natural noises remain. Birds and distant water and the faint rustle of grasses. Your breathing slows, your shoulders drop, and the last images in your mind are simple ones. Warm light on brick, quiet water, a small flame fading into clean morning air. End of script. Sweet dreams.